Professor Kamaluddin. It's really a great honor and great delight. I just landed this morning from Riyadh, and great delight to be among you at this very important meeting, and humbled to join in my colleagues here in regard to their perspective and regard to this global view. So I was tasked to talk about cancer research without borders, building global partnerships for better outcome, which is a subject that already has been spoken upon by our colleagues as well. These are my disclosures, and these are my contacts. And please feel free. I'm always welcoming. Anybody who would like to reach out, you can take a picture of the QR code. At the same time, the BICC has my contacts. Please feel free to ask for anything which is in regard to a clinical case, anything related to research or education. I'm always very responsive and happy to answer at any time. The perspective that I'd like to bring in today in regard to what I was tasked with, I'm going to decide it or describe it into 3 lessons. And lesson number 1 is more of an exercise, not necessarily of any particularity for this specific disease. It just happened that I'm a medical oncologist who specializes in liver cancer and GI cancers. And as such, I'll talk about this as an example. And if anything, we're all excited in that disease, and some of you might know some of that data. In regard to a study that showed that a combination of immunotherapy, specifically an anti-PD-1 plus a anti-VEGF, would improve survival compared to the tyrosine kinase inhibitor. In that specific case, it was sorafenib. We're very excited here. As you can see, we did not even cross the median survival, and everyone was delighted. This was in the New England, and definitely it set up the stage. And interestingly, this was not the only study that really came out with positive data, but no doubt the perspectives start differing in regard to who's who. And over here, by the way, the updated data showed a median survival of 19.2 months, which is a number that as medical oncologists among us will probably appreciate a lot, because median survival for those diseases can be unfortunately pretty grim and can be counted in 3 to 6 months. So no doubt this 19.2 months came very exciting to everybody. Interestingly, we ourselves at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York, we came onto the stage and we brought in the first combination of 2 immunotherapies, an anti-PD-L1 plus anti-CTLA-4, which if you recall, this is the further development of the work that was done by Jim Allison when he was at Sloan Kettering, ultimately got the Nobel Prize for. And we found actually, yes, the combination of immunotherapy get an improvement in survival compared to sorafenib one more time, this time 16.4 months. But of course, here you pause already saying, wait a minute, 19 is better than 16, and how come we can really make an interpretation of this as being a good positive study? Well, let's confuse ourselves even more, because from our colleagues in China came with a great study, the CARES 310, combining one more time an anti-antigenic, the rivoceranib plus the anti-PD-1 camrelizumab, and they came with an improvement survival 22 months. So who are going to follow, and how can we compare that data? And this is actually like lesson number 1. And please, especially for our trainees, if anybody in the room, always when somebody tell you about data, ask the question, who are the patients? It's very important to really look at the demographics. And that's exactly what we're going to do. If we look at the first study, remember the 19-month from the Umbrave 150, and if you were to really scroll your eyes down all the way to the bottom at the 3rd row up, you'll notice that 50% of patients had hepatitis B. Interestingly, and we know that probably hepatitis B can have value, and I'll explain that in a sec. And if we look at the Himalaya, and about halfway, you'll see about only 30% of the patient had hepatitis B. So already I'm implying to you that maybe Hep B have a certain impact positively to improve on survival. And interestingly, the 3rd study, the CARES 310, remember with the 22 months from China, 75% of patients were hepatitis B. So we can think all of us already, if the more Hep B patients you have, the survival will go up, less Hep B patients you have, survival is going to go down. And this, by the way, was already reported in Nature. The paper of David Pfister have shown that actually patients with hepatitis B will fare better in regard to the outcome of the disease, simply because he suggested some form of immune cells called CD8 that are called exhausted CD8 cells will enhance the response to the immunotherapy, especially to the anti-PD-1, anti-PD-L1. And actually, we ourselves reported that, and we already have shown that when you have a high CD8 and low CD4 combination of the two immune cells and the action to them, you'll fare best in regard patient. You can see that dark color, first column, which really reflect a high CD8, low CD4. And those exhausted CD8 cells were kind of like not described any further, and really they wanted a little bit of further descriptors per se. So lesson number one, what exactly are we doing here? It really, if you ask me, what exactly are we doing, and will the hepatitis B be really the answer to everything? I would say no. And this is really the important lesson. It was not like to tell you here, okay, Hep B more response to immunotherapy. Absolutely not. The point was, it all depends, and depends on many variables. And we're going to dissect some of those variables to really tell you how you really come to those perspectives that are important. And what is lesson number two? Interestingly, as much we all convinced ourselves that hepatitis B is really the answer, then a new study came out actually not that long ago, and this actually came from our colleagues not far away from here in Hong Kong, that looked at, again, combination of two immunotherapies, and the survival this time was 23 months or so. But interestingly, only 30% of patients were Hep B. So that's confusing now. We already agreed that with the CARES 310 study, more Hep B improved survival. Now we have less Hep B, and we have a higher number. And this is really where important for all of us, and that's really the lesson which is critical. Don't let us be stagnant to an answer as being a static answer. We have to think dynamically and based on the data is coming from. And to that matter, as you all know, actually this is the Nobel Prize this year, and this is actually work that was started at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and we were the first to describe TOX, which is actually an enhancer that can be manipulator of the CD8 cells that we just spoke about. And not only that, but this is where the Nobel Prize came from, with the FOXP3 regulator, which really, it will control how much of the impact of the CD8 cells can have in regard to the outcome, and as such, it's not only Hep B. So if I were to look at it, it's going to be like more of a map. We have CD4, CD8, FOXP3, myeloid cells, CTLA4, Ki67, PD1, PD-L1, and Hep C and Hep B. And this really required a lot of work. So what does it mean? Interestingly, as you can imagine, patients get liver cancer in the world for different reasons. For example, here in where we are in Bangladesh, probably Hep B has a kind of good presence. If you go further to the east, you'll probably see more the Hep B as well. But if you go to the west, and especially with colleagues from Italy and to Europe, Hep C will drive it per se. And as such, if we don't compare our data, we're not going to do much. We really have to learn how to compare our data, how to really work together. To that matter, and this is not really what was the initial initiative of, but we actually did an effort where we really crossed borders, and we invited 72 physicians from 36 countries that are all over the world, and you can see them nicely delineated in the publication we had. And proudly, by the way, Bangladesh was with us. Actually, Professor Kamaluddin was representing Bangladesh. And we really tried to really understand how can we look into all those perspectives and learn from to get the better part. Interestingly, also, we focused quite a bit over here about the countries or the regions where there are conflicts. Conflicts means not necessarily a war conflict, could be a political conflict, could be an economic conflict, whatever we say is different. And as you know, one of the oldest, or the oldest actually conflict in the world is actually Kashmir, 1947 between India and Pakistan. And if anything, the genetic of the disease, as we can imagine, the people in Kashmir are the same people. They were just diverged, separated because of the conflict per se. Did we ever compare the patients, see how do they get in regard to, for example, the example I'm giving here about CD8, CD4? Well, India did. Actually, they compared Kashmir to Eastern India. They compared Kashmir to Calcutta. And interestingly, Pakistan did as well. They compared actually, again, Lahore to other parts of Pakistan. But what was missing? You want to compare Kashmir to Kashmir. And because of the setting, we could not do that. And interestingly, we really offered the opportunity over here to really sit together and see how can we sort this out with the perspective of really what is best for the patient, because we all will learn from information of that nature. Interestingly, as we did our exercise over here, we got a little bit of a challenge because, like, who owns what? Because the minute you start talking tissue, and already many countries are already saying that we are not ready to share data. And why is that? Because we feel like it's an asset that's important for our country, and we don't want to take a risk of like sharing information with others. Think about it this way now. Let's assume you have an island where everybody smokes. They wake up, they are born, and they start smoking. And everybody get KRAS mutation, everybody get lung cancer. If 100% of the population has KRAS mutation, 100% of the population is smoking, 100% of the population is getting lung cancer, what do you call this? Normal. Because they never compared it to anything else. But if they happen to have an island next to them where they don't smoke, and they don't get lung cancer, they don't have KRAS mutation, interestingly, now you say, they live longer. It seems they don't have those symptoms. We should look into that. And as such, your data means nothing if you don't share it, if you don't compare it. And that's really an important point per se over here. Now, who owns what? This is something that really we looked at very carefully. And I will really here invite you to really an exercise of that perspective. Because, by the way, in most parts of the world, if you go down to the hospital and you have blood drawn from you or whatever tissue is taken, who owns it? Yourself. But in certain countries, it's not. And if anything, this was really brought in a very famous case. You might remember hairy cell leukemia, if any of you in the hematology world. And interestingly, in the old days before all those novel therapies, the hairy cell leukemia treatment was actually taking the spleen out. And this was a law case that went to the Supreme Court in the United States, in California, because Moore, he's a patient. Remember, when you go into law, that's it, everything becomes public. So Moore is the patient name. And interestingly, his spleen was taken out at UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. And the doctors were quite amazed. They thought they can learn a lot from it. So they preserved it, and they really guarded that spleen. And they start taking blood from Mr. Moore along the time to try to protect, what they can learn from one day after the other. I'm giving you a little bit in this kind of like an interesting story to kind of like put it in perspective. One day, they said, we didn't consent more to all of that collection that we're doing spleen and blood and what have we. Let's call him. So they called Moore at home and say, by the way, we doing this, etc. We forgot to consent you. Can we get your consent? It just happened that Moore's friend was at home and he's a lawyer. And said, hold on. What exactly going on over here? This is end up at the Supreme Court. And the question is, Moore arguing, this is my spleen, I own it, I want it back, I want to keep it to myself. And UCLA is saying, well, but we did all that research, what have we? And I'm really just kind of like, by the way, there's no right and wrong here, but I'd love to see the perspective. Please, if you think the case was won by Moore because Moore owns the spleen, at the same time, it is his spleen after all, they did not consent to agree to that. Please raise your hand if you think the Supreme Court gave Moore the right for the spleen. And by the way, I will not know who you are because I don't know who you are, but just like raise your hand if you think Moore won it. Nobody. So Moore? Okay, so we have one for Moore. What about the others? Do you think that UCLA won the case? And they're saying, well, we didn't consent him, we messed up, but, after all, this is good for research. Any thoughts? You guys are all shy. Well, I'll tell you, probably deep in heart yourself, you said, maybe, Moore is right. After all, he owns the spleen. It's his. Like, you don't want anybody to take something which is yours. This is really what makes sense. Well, interestingly, for this other half of you that really were kind of like playing with the thought, actually the Supreme Court gave it to UCLA. Which, interestingly, you just wonder what's going on. They actually gave a tap on the hand for UCLA. Next time, consent the patient. They definitely gave them a hard time on that one. But at the same time, they stated in the discussion part of the Supreme Court decision a beautiful word. They said that we really vote for UCLA to keep the spleen because, number one, Mr. Moore doesn't have the abilities at home. And if you have a spleen freezer at home, I don't. So we don't know how to preserve spleen. But more importantly, they said, because this is important for humanity. And this is really the key word. This is really for humanity. And for that matter, you can see that we have to evolve with those ideas, sharing, but appropriately caring for the data that we do. And for that reason, I bring in the perspective of another Nobel Prize from economics, the Solo model. If you recall, when Europe came out of the World War II, there was like the Marshall Plan and tried to really evolve the science and evolve the industries. And interestingly, if you were to think about how this just happened, and I translate that into what applies to all of us because we're all physicians. Interestingly, if you are just to see patients and keep seeing more patients, you're going to go, as you can see in that blue line at the bottom, patient care at a certain steady continued rate. But really to be able to help Europe to jump and any other country to jump to the next level and have an exponential growth, you have to depend on a certain A factor. This was really what Solo brought in, which can be dependent on our work, our research, our sharing research, and also our education. But more importantly, the big elephant in the room is data. And data has to be respectively shared appropriately and respectively taken care of appropriately to make sure that we benefit the most from it. For that matter, we did not give up the idea of what we did first virtually as a Zoom meeting among all those doctors from around the world. Actually, part of the Asia Pacific Primary Liver Expert meeting that we proudly were able to bring to the United States for the first time ever, and we had it in Honolulu, Hawaii last year in July 2024. We had a side meeting on the board of the USS Missouri, which, as you probably know, in Pearl Harbor is the only long-standing ship from World War II. And it was really an important ceremonial thing because it's really becoming a message of peace. And we spoke with the US Navy and we got permission to go into the captain's cabin. And actually, believe it or not, we had a good number of those physicians who were with us on the Zoom come to Honolulu, Hawaii, and we were there together to try to understand how we can work together. And we had one visitor who came to us who's not a doctor, came from the United Nations. They heard about our work, and I don't want to really kind of like give any negative view, but as you know, the United Nations, let's put it in a positive way, is struggling how to answer to problems in the world. So they like the idea that we're coming with what's called medical diplomacy. So at the moment, and this is important for everybody to hear, especially our young doctors, colleagues, we have actually currently an official statement from the United Nations branch or subsidiary called part of the WHO called the non-communicable diseases. And they are offering us for free the Palace of Nations in Geneva as part of an opportunity for us to meet and work with young doctors how to fix words of that nature. The question is not to go and sit down in Geneva and have nice dinners and lunches and say, okay, the world is bad and cry over it. Absolutely not. So there'll be a competition for young doctors, junior faculty, fellows, residents, medical students, and they are to be invited to look into how can they look into a medical problem related to cancer that can occur in their region, especially if they are ready to go across borders. And in other words, despite the conflicts that might arise, we're going to here at Memorial Sloan Kettering be the middleman. We'll help them out. We'll offer our facilities to really build in the research that's necessary for them to develop the world. And this is something that we hope that Bangladesh and all other countries around the world will be part of. So stay tuned. It's coming hopefully in 2026. That's where we are. Now we go back to still the problem of the data. We're going to come and bring all those doctors in. They're going to say, okay, we're going to work together. But then we're going to say, who owns what? And if anything, this is really what we're really trying to bring in here with the concept of, and not only one, but the example of federated learning. And this, by the way, we learned from the sectors in economics. And we're now kind of like moving and translating into medicine. Because if part A has data, and part B has data, and they want to compare it, federated learning, as you can see in certain steps, will keep it anonymized enough that you can really compare them, come up with that regrouping of the data as being the collection of data, but neither of them know that this data is theirs or the base of the other entity. It will be their data altogether. So that's really one way that we can circumvent that, and that's why I would say we really are here to regrow and rebirth of medical diplomacy that started in regard to infectious diseases, but we're bringing it to the non-communicable diseases, specifically to cancer. And with this, I'll move to the last question, which is the third lesson. You remember I showed you at the beginning about the great outcome we're having in liver cancer, and again, as I said, I'm giving this only because this is my expertise, and I give it as an example for many things that can bring from whatever expertise you have. If anything, at the moment, we proudly are able to talk about 5-year survival data in liver cancer. We just reported that at ESMO in Barcelona last year. Combination of durvalumab plus tremelimumab, 20% of the patients, 1 in 5, are alive at 5 years. Interestingly, this compares very drastically to what median survival is in Africa for the disease. In Africa, median survival of liver cancer is 3 months. In other words, whoever diagnosed over here, they will actually, sadly, half of them will die before Ramadan. That's really how bad it is. Interestingly, and this is what I'm happy that to hear from Dr. Abbasi about really how do we describe ourselves, how do we work on it. And by the way, this is an important slide, even though it's not really in medicine, but it really gives us a perspective. And I like very much what you brought in regard to the LMICs. And by the way, you know that a certain country can decide if they are LMIC or not, because based on strategies regard economies, etc. Anybody knows where, in regard to this, Bangladesh set? Actually, Bangladesh should really celebrate big news for them, because, and for all of you in Bangladesh here, because you are at the moment a LDC, a least developed country. And there are actually the LDCs are 48 countries in the world, and Bangladesh is one of them, which means actually you don't decide for yourself you're LDC. The United States tell you you are an LDC. But the good news is for Bangladesh, and that's something that requires applause, November 2026, Bangladesh for the first time ever is going to be out of the LDC, and they can become an LMIC, which really means they have freedom. They can strategically now decide how to really evolve things. And this, by the way, moving from LDC to LMIC is because of the great economic development that are happening in Bangladesh. So this really requires an applause for that purpose, and really congratulations for Bangladesh for that purpose. Now, to go back to Africa to close it up, we actually, to really do that same process, we actually collected a group of physicians, 26 of them from throughout Africa, and then we asked a question to everybody, same way as Bangladesh did their work for the LDC, and we said, what do you have there? And we discovered actually Africa does better than we think in regard to vaccination, screening. Interestingly, about 70% of patients have access to vaccine and screening for hepatitis B. But when it comes to immunotherapy, as we can see over here, only 5% of the physicians in Africa have access to immunotherapy. So you can imagine where the 3 months is coming from. For that reason, how do you argue this? How do you really support it? You don't go cry for it. And I love very much what said Dr. Abbasi. You are not here to cry over it. You have to really build the model for it. And for that purpose, we really like what actually Dr. Stiglitz, whom I happen to be, he was my mentor through my MBA, who got the Nobel Prize for the Act of Globalization. You have to really work on and study what the structure of the industry is, like in medicine, for example. Look at the taste locally. How do we work things? Listen to people. Don't really lecture people about things. Let them work for themselves. You get to business performance, but you have to really add in ESG to get to what's called economic performance. And this is really the path that, for example, we're giving a great example here in Bangladesh. With this, why this is important? Because you know what we call patients with liver cancer in Africa? They're called the workforce. Do you know that the median age of a patient with liver cancer in Africa is 35-year-old? These are people who wake up in the morning and go to work, and they have liver cancer, and on top of that, they could have HIV. But they are the workforce of countries. So what we're doing is, and this is really where my law degree is helping out with this, we're meeting with governments. This is our meeting with the Attorney General of Ghana. We met with Cameroon, we met with Egypt, and we're actually telling them, you have to invest in your people. You have to make sure that your economy will really support those people, give them the therapy they need, because they are the value for this. And actually, we ended up in the White House talking about this with the idea that, after all, protect the tissue of people, make sure that we learn from it, and make sure that people invest into it. Why this is important? And this is a very important message for Bangladesh, same like other countries. If I call any friend of mine in Africa at this point in time, tell them, hey, by the way, I'm doing some research in New York. Can you please send me some tissue? I guarantee you they will do it. And me as being nice, I say, okay, don't worry. I'll send you the DHL's bill. I'll pay for it. No problem at all. Just kind of like send me the tissue. And you know what? I'm going to be even nice. I'll put you first author on that paper. And we're going to have a paper together and you'll be the first author. What did I do? I just did a crime. I stole tissue from Africa. That's exactly what we should. Please, please, I urge you, don't do this. If anything, what we're doing over here, we're telling an argument that we have to invest in that work. We have to prepay for it to make sure that we come out with what's results come from it. And for that reason, please, please, always be a problem solver in regard to that and respect what people have and make them get or celebrate with them the best they can out. With this, I stop here and thanks again for listening. Thank you.